Okay, cool, thanks.
Recording in progress.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So, to take note for everyone, maybe during the session you may unmute, you may mute yourself. Yeah. So, to avoid any interaction first. All right. So I will over to Tarun right now. Hi, Tarun.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen and then we'll go from there. Yeah. And once you can see my screen, just let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I need to do the camera thing, but I don't think it's necessary, right? Yeah. Leave more bandwidth for audio, but anyway, so you can see how I look like. So this is me. Is this good enough? Yeah. Because I want you to focus on, yeah, what I'm teaching, not on me. Yeah. Okay. Is it okay? We can get started?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to this session on prompt engineering with some industry applications, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the basics of prompt engineering first. What are the different types of prompt engineering?
01.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Let me just come.
995.
Hello. For those who are forgot to mute your mic.
I've muted it. Yeah.
Thanks. Cool.
Yeah. So so we're in the first part we're going to talk about kind of like the different types of prompt engineering, and then we'll go into the applications. Okay, is that okay with everyone? Yeah. Okay, great. So what I'll be doing is I'll be contacting the OpenAI API. Okay, and so the prompt commands that I'll be issuing will be coming through their API. So it's not going to be coming, of course, through the normal Chat GPT interface. It's going to be coming straight through their API. Okay. For those of you who want to use OpenAI's API, you can do the same thing. All you need to do is go to platform openai.com, make sure you sign up. After you sign up, you can go to API keys in your in this drop down here. Just go to view API keys, and you'll be able to create a new key. Okay, and so when you create the new key, you can copy that key, and you can paste it, over here. Okay. Ideally, you would not want to do something like this. You would want to save your key to a .env file on your file system and then load that .env file using Python. Yeah. But just for the sake of convenience, I've done it this way. And anyway, after this webinar, I'll delete the key. So yeah, it'll be a one-time thing. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, install the OpenAI API. So you can do that just like this. And after that, you want to import the OpenAI library, and you want to set the API key. Okay. Now let's get into the meat of things. These are some example Chat API calls. A Chat API call has two required inputs. The model that you want to use. So typically you want to use GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. GPT-4 is only available to subscribers who have been given access, specific access to GPT-4 through the API, right? And you can apply on the wait list. I think by now, almost everyone will get GPT-4 access. But if not, you'd have to go through a waiting list. Yeah. For these examples that I'm going to be showing you today, we're going to be using GPT 3.5 Turbo. So that's accessible to everybody. Okay. The other thing that you would need to pass is the messages. Okay. So the way that GPT 3.5 Turbo, GPT-4 chats work is through what we call a chat completion. Okay. And basically, you have roles. Typically, when you ask questions, you use the user role. Okay. Or when you're giving instructions, you're using the user role. However, there are other roles available. Okay. Such as the system and assistant role. And what these roles do is allow you to fine-tune the response that you're going to get when you ask or generate a content using the user role. Okay. So it allows you to get better responses. Okay. So here is just an example of a conversation. You are a helpful assistant. So essentially, when you assume the assistant role, you are giving it instructions about how it should behave. For example, you are a social media marketer, right? And you're going to help me with generating social media copy, okay, for LinkedIn, okay, or for Facebook or whatever, okay. So this way, you're kind of guiding the future responses, what they should be. And now I'm assuming the role of the user, and I'm just saying knock knock, and then I'm pretending to respond as if I were ChatGPT, right? So I'm saying who's there, and then I'm again going back and saying orange, and then I'm waiting for a response. And if ChatGPT understands what is going on here, it would know that this is a knock knock joke, and it should respond with orange who, correct? So if I run this and I just look at the response object, you'll see I get a bunch of different information, like what model I was using, how many tokens this response generated, and what was the actual response, which is orange who. Okay, and it was done by the assistant. Okay, so we can see here that what these different things mean, right? One of the important things that you should be aware of is the tokens, right? So when you're sending text to ChatGPT, what it does is it takes your text and it tokenizes it. It breaks it up into chunks, okay? And these chunks could be individual words. They could be individual parts of words. So for example, a token could be you, or it could be AR, right? Or it could be HELP, and then another token could be FUL. So what it's saying is that whatever you passed in was 39 tokens, and whatever responded with was 3 tokens. So orange who is not 2 tokens, it's actually 3 tokens. Okay. Now, of course, you can't see what the tokens are from the response. But if you do work more with, the OpenAI API, you can actually see what the tokens are that ChatGPT is using. Okay. So yeah, this explains more about the response and what it means, right? One thing I will definitely note here is the finished reason, which is stop here. The reason the model stopped generating text. So it stopped generating text because it got a proper response and that's it. But sometimes it could stop generating text because it reached the max token limit. Okay. So ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo has a 4,000 token limit, meaning your input has a certain number of tokens and the output it generates is a certain number of tokens. And the total number of tokens cannot exceed 4,000. For GPT-4, that limit is 8,000, right? So GPT-4 could take in more input and generate more output, in other words, right? If you just want to get the response, the actual content of the response, you can just do something like this, right? And then you'll just get the response, which is orange who, right? In our knock knock joke. So here's just another example. Explain asynchronous programming in the style of the pirate Blackbeard. Okay, and I just want to get the response, just the content of the response, right? And again, I send my response and I get back ahoy matey, asynchronous program be like having blah blah blah, right? See that? So it responded back. Okay, so let's get into the tips for instructing GPT. Okay, through the API, of course. So let's take a look at, again, we're kind of framing the response that we're going to get using system role. You are a friendly and helpful teaching assistant. You explain concepts in great depth using simple terms, and you give examples to people to help them learn. At the end of each explanation, you ask a question to check for understanding. And so then you ask, can you explain how fractions work? See that? Sure, fractions are a way of representing. So you can see this is a very detailed response, right? It's a longish response. It's a detailed response. And then at the end, it follows the instructions from the system and asks you a question to make sure that you understand, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, let's change it. Let's change how it will respond, right? So now I'm going to assume that the assistant will give very short, terse answers rather than the elaborate answers before. So again, I use the system role, and this time I'm couching or coaching, the response to be shorter, right? And I ask the same exact question. Can you explain how fractions work? But this time you could see that the response is much shorter than before, right? And it didn't ask any follow-up question. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at counting tokens. So we talked about tokens already, and I mentioned it's about 4,000 tokens for GPT-3, 0.5, and about 8,000 tokens for GPT-4. Okay. How do you actually count the tokens? You may be wondering, hey, how do I know if I'm going to go above the limit? Can I just count the number of tokens? And the answer is yes. There's a library called TickToken, which you can install. And that library will allow you to count the number of tokens, right? So you can install that library and then actually use it to count, the number of tokens in this fashion. Yeah. So if I run this is a function in Python that essentially will take my messages and my model and count the number of tokens, depending on the type of model that I'm using. So if I'm using GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, the way you count tokens is slightly different, but nevertheless, it'll count the number of tokens, right? So, so here are some example messages that I'm going to be sending to ChatGPT, and I want to count the number of tokens, right? So if I run this, you will see, okay, well, this is the number of tokens for GPT-3 and it's the number of tokens for GPT-4, right? Again, I'm sending the same message, but the number of tokens is slightly different, right? And that's what we would expect, right? So GPT-4 may have a different embedding where it may have a different number of tokens, or it may just be generating slightly different responses, right? Okay, so far so good. Yeah, so let's move on to the guidelines for prompting. Okay, we'll talk about the 2 prompting principles and the related tactics in order to write more effective prompts. Okay, we'll be using GPT 3.5 Turbo. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function, right, that will take in my prompt, use this GPT 3.5 model all the time, and use a temperature of 0. Okay, what does temperature mean, right? If you recall from above, temperature is the amount of randomness in the response. So if temperature is 0, basically you're saying you want very little to no randomness in the response. So every time you send the prompt, you will get back the same answer. Okay, so that's very good if you want consistency in the way it answers back. Okay, there are other parameters that you can pass to the API so that ChatGPT behaves in a certain way. Okay, but we're not going to cover those in this short lesson because that's irrelevant for what we want to learn today. Yeah. Okay, so this is a function and it'll pass in this the prompt message using the user role. Okay, so it'll only assume the user role, right? And we could of course change that by just passing in messages, and this way we could just pass in all of our messages, including system role messages. Yeah, but for these examples, I'll just do it this way. And then the temperature normally will be just 0, but we can change the temperature. We can override it if we want to. Okay, and it'll return back again the content only. Okay, so here's an example. I have some text here, and this text is basically saying instructions, right? And I'm saying summarize the text delimited by triple backticks into a single sentence. So this is my prompt. Okay, so one of the first principles of prompt engineering is if you want to summarize something or you want to generate some content based on something else, it's always a good idea to delimit what is that something else. So in this case, right, what I want ChatGPT 2 to do is summarize the text that's inside here. So all I want ChatGPT 3 to do is to summarize this text. But how will ChatGPT know that this is the text I want to summarize? Well, you can use delimiters. So what I'm using is I'm using 3 backticks to delimit this text. Okay. So this way, when I pass in the message will be summarize the text delimited by triple backticks into a single sentence, backtick, 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 and then this entire thing, and then backtick, backtick, backtick. And that will go to ChatGPT as the instruction, right? So then I'll get a response. And so there you go. That's the summary of what's inside here. Okay. The other thing that you can do is, in addition to using delimiters, the other thing you could do is tell ChatGPT to respond in a particular format. So you could say, hey, respond in CSV format, or respond in XML format, or respond in JSON format. And then you can specify the keys that it uses. So here I'm saying, generate a response, generate a list of 3 made-up book titles along with their authors and genres, and use these specific keys. So here it generated a response, but in the format that I wanted. So if I wanted this to be in CSV format, to provide them in CSV format with the following columns, see? And then if I generate it this way, I would get it in CSV format instead, right? Or if I wanted it in XML format, right? Again, with the following, let's say, tags, right? And then, you would get back the same response, but now it would be in XML, right? And so it look like this. Got it? So this allows you to decide what format you want to get the response in. Another tactic is to ask the model to check whether conditions are satisfied. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, you could pass in some text and say, hey, what is this? A bunch of instructions? If it is a bunch of instructions, I want you to change it so that it's listed in steps. So if someone just gave you a paragraph and you wanted to identify if that paragraph was a list of instructions, you can instruct ChatGPT to identify whether it is instructions and then change the output maybe to be step by step. If it isn't any instructions, then just say, there are no, this is not instructions. Okay, so it doesn't need to do anything. So here I'm saying making a cup of tea is easy. First you need to do this, then you need to do that. So this is obviously a set of instructions. It's like a recipe. So our prompt to ChatGPT is, you'll be provided with text delimited by triple quotes. If it contains a sequence of instructions, rewrite those instructions in the following format. If the text does not contain instructions, then just say no steps provided. So here I have, again, my delimiter. So I'm using 3 quotes as delimiters instead of 3 backticks. But again, I could use 3 backticks. And then, here's the text that I want to check to see if it's a set of instructions. If it is, then it'll obviously change it to step by step. So if I run this through, it said step 1, step 2. So it recognized it as a step of instructions and changed it, right? What about this one? Is this a set of instructions? No, this is not a set of instructions. So if I pass this text instead, it'll say it's not a set of instructions, so I'll ignore it. Okay, so this is great news. Like if, for example, you're in a company and you're only trying to identify the negative reviews, you could pass this instruction saying, if the review is negative, then tag it, summarize it and tag how negative the review is. And then, you could take that, put it into some database, and that's it. Now you're just tagging negative reviews because you'll ignore the positive ones, right? So we'll see an example of that later, but that's what you could use this for, right? In other words, this is a type of filtering, right? Okay. Not every attempt at engineering conversations will succeed at first. If your first attempts fail, don't be afraid to experiment with different types and ways of priming or conditioning the model. Okay, As an example, one developer discovered an increase in accuracy when they inserted a user message that said, "Great job so far. These have been perfect." So the model then says, okay, it conditions itself to respond more in that fashion. So it'll actually help you to get better responses. So it's kind of like ChatGPT as a personality in that sense, right? It likes, positive conditioning, right? Positive motivation. For more ideas on how to lift the reliability of the models, consider reading this guide here, right? It was written for non-ChatGPT models, but many of the principles will apply. So this may or may not work. So I may have to, find what the actual file is here, but probably you can look it up too on Google. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the second principle, which is give the model time to think. Okay. What does this mean, right? Well, let's take a look at an example, right? So the prompt is perform the following actions. Summarize the following text, delimited by triple backticks with one sentence. Translate the summary into French. List each name in the French summary. Output a JSON object that contains the following keys: French summary and number of names. Separate your answers with line breaks. Okay, so what do you mean by giving it the model time to think? What you're doing is you're separating out the instructions. You're not trying to do everything all at once. So when you separate out what you wanted to do, right, if you have to do multiple things, then that will help the model to respond in a more effective way, right? Rather than making it do everything all at once. Okay. So if we do that, and we wait for our response, we'll see that we have the summary, then it translated it to French, right? Then it listed each of the names in the French summary, which are Jack and Jill, right? And even used the French word for names. And then it wrote it in JSON. See that? So I could just change this to another language, of course. So I could say Malay, for example, right? And then, okay, and then I could just change that to Malay. Yeah. And then let's see what we get this time. And so we get the translation and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. It didn't say nama, but yeah, so that's quite interesting. But anyway, as for output in a specified format, so we've already, stated that before, but this is quite interesting. So again, we give the instructions, right? We give the instructions again, but this time, this time we say we want it like this format. So we want you to respond in this particular way, right? So this time when it responds, it'll specifically respond like this is the text, this is the summary, this is the translation, this is the name. So this is the summary, this is the translation, right? This is the names, this is the output. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So I'm specifically saying I want you to respond this way. Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, let's take a look at another example. I want this to respond by taking all this information and creating a table from it. right? So the output now is a tabular format. So it's going to summarize this information in the form of a table, right? And so there you go, right? So, this is great for note taking, right? You could just take a bunch of, meeting notes, right? That may be generated from speech to text, right? And then just put that in and just say summarize it, in this format, and that's it, uh, put the names of the participants, summarize what the main points of the meeting were in bullet point format, blah, blah, blah. See that? Yeah. So that's where it becomes helpful. So it becomes helpful in meetings, or it becomes helpful in customer service, right? When you have speech to text of the phone call, and then you just want to summarize the phone call, right? Okay. Instruct the model to work out its own solution before rushing to a conclusion. This is a very interesting thing. This allows you to grade students' homework. Okay. So if a student submits an assignment, you can let ChatGPT grade it. Okay. So no more manual grading. Okay. So determine if the student's solution is correct or not. This is the question. This is the student's answer. Okay. Now, if you just say, is the student correct or not? It'll just say, it may just tell you the student is correct, but actually the student's answer is not correct. Okay. So this is where we could say, your task is determined if the student's solution is correct or not. To solve the problem, do the following. And this is going back to the earlier tactic. Let ChatGPT think. So what do you mean by let ChatGPT think? Well, you give it a step-by-step process. So you say, first, work out your own solution to the problem, and then compare your own internal solution to the student's solution, and if they match or not, and then spit out whether it's the right answer. So by doing it this way, ChatGPT will try to figure out the solution on its own first, and then do a comparison, right? And if you do it that way, you're giving ChatGPT time to think, okay? Because if you don't do it that way, ChatGPT will just try to look for, overall grammatical correctness. It won't know that it's supposed to look at this as a mathematical problem first and solve it first, because it's a large language model. It's not a mathematics engine. So by instructing it to act like a mathematical engine first, and then doing a comparison, you'll get the right answer. So here you can see that now it says correctly that this is not the right answer. Okay, it's not the right answer. So the right answer was this, 360x plus 100,000, but the student came up with 450x plus 100,000, which is incorrect. Okay. You always have to be aware of hallucination. So for example, this company is real, but this product is not. So I'm asking it to give me a summary of this product from this company, but this product does not even exist. Okay, but ChatGPT will still hallucinate and give you an answer, right? Why does it do that? Well, in this particular case, it's not able to go to the internet and check to see if this product actually exists. But in ChatGPT 4, you can connect it to the internet and ask, and then say, check to see if the product actually exists first. Okay. You could also prompt it, tell me about, check if the product exists first. right? And so this way you can kind of minimize hallucination by it going out and checking, right? And it'll tell you that, hey, I can't browse the internet because, I'm using ChatGPT 3.5 without the plugin, blah, blah, blah. So, but look at this. It's a hypothetical product. So by me, steering it in that direction, checking that it exists first, it's saying it may not exist, right? So that's an important point that you'd want to make, right? Is that if you want to minimize hallucination, you can also say, hey, this may not exist, or this may not be the case, or if it's ChatGPT 4, hey, please research it first. Do a step-by-step, say, research this, check if it exists, and then say step 2, then do this, do a summary or whatever, right? And so by doing that, you're minimizing the chance of hallucination, okay? Okay, so finally, we're done with part 1, and we're gonna move on to part 2, which is types of prompting, okay? So we're going to learn the different types of prompting: instruction-based, role-based, few-shot, chain of thought, and zero-shot chain of thought. One of the simplest prompting methods is just giving instructions. Okay? So again, here's a prompt: read the following sales email, remove any personally identified information, and replace it with appropriate placeholder. What does this do? It converts the email to a template, which you can use in digital, marketing, right? In email marketing, right? So I'm going to take this email and I'm going to convert it to a template. And here's my template. So now I can use this template in MailChimp or whatever. And there you go. Yeah. This is called role-based prompting. I want you to act as an etymologist. I will give you a word and you'll research the origin of the word and blah, 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 and you'll, give me some stuff, right? So this is role-based, yeah? And so it'll research this word shampoo and give you like all the detail about it, like it originated in India, blah, blah, blah. And the British, took it and they changed it to shampoo because they can't pronounce anything. And that's it. Okay. Okay. Few-shot prompting. Yet another prompting strategy is few-shot prompting, which is basically just showing the model a few examples, which are called shots, of what you want it to do. So you're grooming the model as to how it should respond. Okay, this is very similar to one of the tactics we discussed earlier about, giving it positive motivation. Hey, you're on the right track. Hey, like that, So this way it knows that it's supposed to respond in this way. So here is your task is to answer in a consistent style. This is the child asking a question. This is the grandparent responding. This is the child asking a question. And then you want it to respond as a grandparent. But you want it to respond as a grandparent, kind of like how the grandparent already responded in the past. So this is our context. So ChatGPT will pick up on the context of how a grandparent is supposed to respond. Okay. And so therefore it'll respond in that way. Okay. Does that make sense? So now it'll respond as kind of like how this response was. Yeah. Okay. Here's an example of a few-shot conversation. Again, I'm going to bring back the system and, I'm going to say, help me translate the following corporate jargon into plain English. Sure, I'd be happy to. You're pretending to be ChatGPT. Now you say new synergies will help drive top-line growth. And then you translate it. Things working well together will increase revenue. And then you give it another example, and then you give it another proper response. And then finally, you give it what you wanted to translate into plain English. And then using these previous examples, it gets an idea of how you want it to respond. Okay. And so when it responds, it'll give you, yeah, we don't have enough time to complete everything perfectly for the client. That sounds like a pretty good translation of what this means. Okay. Okay. There are also variants of shot prompting. There's 0 shot and 1 shot. 0 shot just means you ask a question. Okay. You don't give it any previous things. Whereas, for example, 1 shot says add 3 plus 3, and that's a 6. Add 2 plus 2. What is that going to be? And that's going to be, 4, right? So you just gave an example. Okay. Chain of thought prompting. Chain of thought prompting is a recently developed prompting method which encourages the large language model to explain its reasoning. The below image shows a few shot standard prompt left compared to a chain of thought prompt on the right. Right? Notice the difference here. Okay. So here, what you're doing is you're asking it essentially to explain itself, right? When you ask it to explain itself, it will avoid, again, hallucinating, right? And again, I'm doing it step by step. So I'm allowing it time to think, right? So by allowing it time to think, it'll give me the right answer, right? So Jane has 12 flowers. She gives 2 flowers to her mom and 3 flowers to her dad. So that's 5 flowers. So now she has 7 flowers, right? So step 1, calculate the total number of flowers Jane gives away. 2 flowers to mom plus equals how many flowers? Subtract the total number of flowers given away from the initial number of flowers. 12 minus how many given away equals how many left. So by doing it this way, right? It'll likely give you the right answer, right? Another way to do that is just called 0 shot chain of thought. So instead of doing step by step, you just tell it, think step by step. See that? And so if you do it that way, and I go back here, rather than doing this, for example, right? Rather than doing this, I could just copy this, paste it, and say, just think step by step. And I don't have to do any of that, right? I could just say, let's think step by step. See that? And then let's see if we get, another proper response. There you go. See? So this way I don't have to break it down. I just say, you think step by step. Okay. Okay. So I think I'll just move this down over here. Yeah. Okay. So same thing here, let's think step by step. Okay. See that? So there you go. So this way it's forced to think mathematically as well. Yeah. Okay. So if you have a word problem, like at school or at work, you could ask it to think step by step and then get the right answer. Yeah. Applications of prompting. Finally, we're going to talk about work. Yeah. How to use it at work. Yes. In this lesson, you'll learn the different types of prompting available: multiple choice questions, discussion questions, iterative, summarizing, inferring, transforming, and expanding. Okay. So here's a prompt, right? This is a question that was on the LSAT in the United States, which is the test you take to become a lawyer. And again, what am I doing? I'm doing 0 shot chain of thought right down here. Okay. And let's see if it gives us the right answer. Yes, so that's good. Yeah. So notice that how it says that it goes through each response and it tells you whether the response weakens the argument or strengthens the argument. So the correct answer is the one that strengthens the argument, right? And that's the right answer. Yeah. Okay. Write the next paragraph of my essay. So what is this an example of? Anybody? This is an example of one-shot prompting, right? So I'm giving it my first paragraph, and then I ask it to fill in the rest in my style. So the other thing you could do is give it examples of your style of writing, and then just ask it to start writing in your style, right? Write me an article about, prompt engineering based on the style of this article that I've already written about another topic, right? And then there you go. Now you have all your blog posts, right? So here it's going to write the next paragraph in a consistent style. In this paragraph, I may be taking one side, and then in the next paragraph, it then takes the other side, right? It knows that it's supposed to continue with the argument itself, right? Okay, iteratively refine a prompt until you get what you want. So continually, craft the prompt until you get exactly what you want, okay, in your company. So let's say you have a fact sheet for your company. Let's say you work at a furniture manufacturing place, right? So you have a furniture factory somewhere, in Kelantan or something, and you have a fact sheet, and you want to advertise this to retailers, okay? So here's your fact sheet, and you want it to create a description for a retail website based on this fact sheet. So you want to write a product description, right? And then you could just say, okay, I get some response back. So I'm writing a summary for a fact sheet, okay, for my marketing team to use on the company website to advertise this product. And this is what we get. And maybe this is too long. It's too long. It's not really what we want, right? So what I can do is I can refine the prompt further. So I'll say your task is to help, a marketing team create a description, write a product description based on the information, blah, 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 use at most 50 words. So now I'm constraining ChatGPT to respond only, with a product description that's at most 50 words. And so if I take a look at the number of words, it's 47 words. That's perfect, right? That's perfect. The other thing I may want to do is say, hey, the intended audience for this description is furniture retailers. So it should be more technical in nature and focused on the materials. And then this way, now ChatGPT will respond with something that's catering more to that target audience, right? So it'll focus more on that response being towards the target audience, in this case, furniture retailers, because furniture retailers are not consumers. They're not the end customer, right? So they're only interested really in the technical details, right? So then we have the technical details, see that? And we could change the output. So now I'm going to combine different techniques, use at most, 50 words, right? And then just say, you could say, convert the response into a table, right? And just see what you get. Okay. Again, you're refining it. You're trying to figure out like what will it do, right? And if it's not giving you what you want, you just continue to refine it, right? Okay. Use at most 50 words, and output as JSON format, for example, right? So just keep on working at it. See, you may have to specify that these are the keys that you want, because it may not know what, of course, you want. So, it'll try its best to figure out like what your intention is, but then you could be very specific about what your intention is, right? So then you get something like this instead. And this is pretty good. It's not bad, right? So here I'm combining techniques, right? I'm combining techniques. Does that make sense? Yeah, to everyone? Okay, so here again, you're specifically guiding it. You're saying at the end of the description, include every 7-character product ID in the technical specification. Okay, so here I'm getting a response, but I'm specifically telling it at the end, the response should have something. It should have the product ID. See that? It may not always adhere to the character limit, for example. Okay, so we can't guarantee that'll do that. JSON format is a format that's used when you want to display something on a website using JavaScript. Okay, so but I could put it into any other format, right? And that's my point, right? Okay. I could even say generated in HTML. Generate an HTML page. And then it'll just generate the HTML for it, right? Okay. Here's another example. Description needs a table of dimensions. Ask it to extract information and organize it into a table. So here again, we have the fact sheet, but now we're saying specifically after the description, include a table that gives the product's dimensions. The table should have 2 columns. In the first column, include the name of the dimension, and then so now you're specifically saying that what you want in the table, right? Format everything as HTML that can be used in the website. So now you're telling it that the output should be HTML. The output of the table should be HTML, right? Or maybe the whole thing. The whole description plus the table should be in HTML, right? So we'll wait for that to come through. And there we go. We generated an entire HTML, including the table. So if we display this, it'll look like this. Not bad, right? And then we can use CSS to style it. Okay. So that's one good use case in your company, right? In this lesson, you will summarize text with a focus on specific topics. Got this panda plush toy for my daughter's birthday, who loves it, blah, blah. Your task is to generate a short summary of a product review for an e-commerce site. Summarize the review delimited by triple in at most 30 words. So again, it will summarize a review. I have to read the review first. So here's a review. And it was, again, under 30 words. Summarize with a focus on shipping and delivery. Again, now I'm doing a focused response. It's like focus on shipping and delivery. So I want to know more about the shipping and delivery. So now it just focuses on that in its summary, right? And again, I could do different types of focus. Okay. Now, instead of summarize, you could use the word extract. And extract will extract only the information that you need, right? So if you say extract shipping information, and then it'll just extract the shipping information, right? And so on and so forth, right? Extract what the customer thought, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now I can give a bunch of reviews and say, hey, for these reviews, summarize the reviews. So to summarize the reviews. Okay. Okay. What about sentiment analysis? Right. So you could have a review and just say, what is the sentiment? Right. And if you just want one word response, just say respond with a single word. See that? So they'll only respond with a single word. Okay. Identify a list of emotions, blah, blah, blah. So you can also get like a list of emotions from the review. Okay. And then you can check to see if the review has any of these emotions or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here we're extracting it. We're saying identify the following items from the review text. And it's actually going to say the item, the brand, and the sentiment. So this way you could say that this particular product has this overall sentiment. So you can get all the reviews from social media, categorize them according to the product, specific product, and then add up all of the reviews, positive, negative, and neutral. And then that way you know how people feel about your product, right? Okay, so you can do multiple things at once, of course, right? Okay. So here we're inferring topics. Okay? And it'll say that these are the topics. And then what you could do is you could have a list of topics that the reader may be interested in. And so this way you could choose articles that the reader would be interested in looking at. So you could build your own type of reading list, right? By only choosing articles that have the topics that you're interested in, right? Okay, so you could build a system that looks at everything that you read online, figures out what are the common topics, and then look for other articles with those topics, right? Okay, transforming. So this is all about language translation, spelling and grammar checking, tone adjustment, and format conversion. Okay, Chat GPT can speak many languages, right? Translate the following English text to Spanish. Tell me which language this is. Selamat pagi, Yua, la, Waya. Let's see what language that is. That's Malay. Actually, that's Manglish, but that's close enough. Okay. Translate the following text to Malay and Spanish and Scottish Pirate. So you could do like 3 different translations. Yeah, 3 different translations. Okay. Translate the following text to Malay in both the formal and informal forms. Right? So this is more formal and this is informal. Right? Universal translator. Imagine that you work for a large multinational e-commerce company and users are messaging you with IT issues, let's say through chat or email, and your staff is from all over the world and speaks in only their native languages. So you need a universal translator. So these messages are coming from all over the world, but your staff only speaks, let's say, English, Mandarin, Tamil, and Malay. So what you can do is you can translate the messages coming in into those 4 languages. So that way, any one of your staff can respond, right? So you can also give specific instructions. If Malay, append la to the end of the sentence, right? Because you must have la at the end of every sentence. Yeah. Malaysia boleh. So that's the original message coming in from a customer. And you wanted to translate it into 4 languages, local languages, English, Mandarin, Tamil, and Malay. And of course, it has to put la at the end if it's Malay, right? Okay. So it actually identifies what language it is, Spanish or Italian or Polish. See that? So when the customer is sending you a message, they can send it in any of their languages, no problem. It'll tell you what their language is, and it'll translate into the local languages so that customer service can attend to it. Okay? Spelling and grammar checking. So this can fix your errors, right? So you can use it to fix your errors. Okay? Yeah. So gone are the days of bad grammar and spelling, right? Okay. Proofread and correct this review. Okay, so it'll proofread it and correct it. And there you go. Okay. You can also, of course, change the response any which way you want to. Into whatever format you want to, again. Right? So you can, change it into markdown format, for example, so on and so forth, right? Change it to HTML format, whatever. Yeah. So this is more about formatting the answer, right? Into whichever format you want, right? Yep. And then I can display the HTML for that, and it looks like that, right? Tone adjustment. You can adjust the tone of something. Okay? Yeah. Okay, language translating, right? Here I'm translating from English to Ebonics. Hi, you're a lovely young lady. So let's translate that into Ebonics. Sup, you a fine young thing, right? I hope everyone knows what Ebonics is, right? Yeah. Okay, format conversion. So here I have some data. Translate the following Python dictionary from JSON to an HTML table, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just converting from one format to another. So I got this, in a particular format, and I just converted to another format. Yeah. And then I can also display this as a table, HTML. Yeah, expanding. In this lesson, you will generate customer service emails that are tailored to each customer's review. Someone sends you a review, it's negative. You want to respond back in an automated way, right? To try to assuage the customer and, calm down the customer, right? So you can actually respond and, to that customer. Say, thank you, blah, 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 and blah, 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 right? And you can become more detailed about, specifically that you want to talk about that product and, apologize, right? See, we're really sorry about that specific product and blah, blah, blah. We understand your frustration, and then we'll do something about it. Yeah. Okay. So that's all your customer service stuff. And that's it. Thank you very much. Are there any questions about, this?
I think I saw in the chat box. So Mio is asking, JSON. What is a JSON format again?
Yeah, I think I already responded to that one.
Okay. So another one, is in the chat box from Charles Ding Ding.
The prompt words are still written by us manually, sometimes forgetting important details. Is there any convenient way to quickly expand our thoughts into prompt words? Yes. You can ask ChatGPT to help you write a prompt. Okay? So you can ask ChatGPT, help me to write a prompt about this fact sheet, right? I want to be able to, get certain details from it. Help me to write a prompt. Okay, so that's called meta prompting. Asking ChatGPT to help you to prompt ChatGPT. Okay?
All right, thanks. Okay, other than that, anyone else have any question about this? Yeah, you can unmute yourself or you can type into the chat box. Okay, yeah.
You should rely on ChatGPT's answers 100% of the time if you are doing social media marketing, content marketing, and generally anything that where you're broadcasting information to a general audience. Okay? You should not completely rely on the responses, or you should monitor the responses if you're talking to individual customers, like email, direct response, or if you're dealing with information like market research, right? In that case, you would want to monitor its responses. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, if you do not have any other questions, so yeah, we will end right now. And also thank you very much everyone for your participate. So yeah, if you have more questions, then yeah, you may just directly to contact with us. So also thank you, Tarun, for your time, and yeah, we will see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend. Bye.